author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we are talking the Golden Dome, income tax, and a whole lot more. It's going to be quite the show. Please remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And here we are on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're having a conversation with Liberty Nation's economics editor, Mr. Andrew Moran. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, tough times for the European Union at the moment with tariffs, right?
Yeah, so heading into the Memorial Day weekend, President Trump out of nowhere went on Truth Social and said, I'm going to impose a 50% tariff on the European Union as of June 1st. And then 2 days later, out of nowhere on Truth Social, he says, yeah, we're going to suspend it until July 9th. And so that's where the state of trade negotiations are. And whether or not it's going to succeed, doubtful.
Yes. So when you say whether or not they're going to succeed, what does success look like?
That's an excellent question, because it's all about, for the administration, yes, tariffs as well, the 30%, let's say 25% tariffs on automobiles. But if you comb through the National Trade Estimate report that was released prior to Liberation Day by the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, there's a long list of the non-monetary trade barriers.
Yep.
Chemical regulations, licensing, currency strategies, all these different things that the administration, dislikes. You're telling me that these things which have compounded for a decade since the formation of the European Union is suddenly going to be dismantled by July 9th within a month? I highly doubt that that's going to occur.
Well, so that's the thing, right? Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, she said that they're going to be working swiftly to come to some kind of deal. And that's when Trump put out that we're going to hold off on the 50% until July 9th. But what does that deal look like for the EU? Because the whole purpose of the EU was this single trading market of member states in which the EU's claim being that we will reduce regulation and barriers for trade between the member state nations. In reality, it was a regulatory overload in just every form, but it's a protectionist situation. That's the entire purpose of the EU, is protectionism for its member states, for the individual markets within the member states. So to get a deal, as you rightly point out, it's nothing to do with just the exports outside of the union or the economic zone. It's also about the non-tariff burden that exists. Now, how can the EU continue to exist as what it is if they are getting rid of these for like what we might call a favored nation deal with America?
Okay. So a couple of things. So I think it was on the day of the announcement, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he appeared on Fox News and he was talking about the European Union. And he made an interesting point that you somewhat alluded to. He said that the member states have no clue what the European Union leadership is doing at all. They're in the dark. They don't know what strategy they're employing. So I thought that was a very interesting point to me. Now, the second part too, when it comes to a trade agreement with the European Union, I tend to believe that the UK-US trade agreement that was announced a couple of weeks ago, that is the blueprint of what all these future trade agreements are going to be, which amounts to very little. You look at these trade deals this trade deal with the UK, and all it is rearranging rearranging chairs on the boat deck. That's all it is doing. So I suspect that the European Union is going to be the same thing, where they may trim around the edges. The United States is going to trim around the edges, and then President Trump is going to declare a victory and say, "Hey, look, we got a better trade agreement out of this." When in the aggregate, nothing much gains for the broader U.S. economy. Now, some industries may benefit slightly, like U.S. agricultural and its beef exports. That may benefit, but as a whole, there's not going to be much substantial change as you expected on that Liberation Day announcement.
Well, actually, I think you have it both right and a little bit wrong. And
No,
I'm not an economist, of course, but I do know the EU. I've studied the EU. I've studied what it does, and what it does is it protects key industries. So now, because the individual markets within the now 27 member states, each of those has big players within the market. So, for example, think champagne from France, think automobiles from Germany, and they have these key drivers. Now, the governments of these nations have to answer to the big markets within their country. And so what happens is the EU says that we're going to help these markets because that's going to be good for the governments. They're trying to get some cooperation from the member states. So the existing government of the time fully backs the EU project, which almost all of them do. We saw it with the Brexit vote of 2016. You had both the British Labour Party and the British Conservative Party both wanting to stay in the EU. And then, of course, just Nigel Farage pushing to get us out. And he was ultimately successful. But what happens is you have, for example, the champagne producers. The EU stamps down on all the other member nations calling any kind of sparkling wine or champagne. And they say, look what we've done for the champagne farmers of France, right? And if it's not from that region, you can't call it champagne. And they say that's a regulatory win. But then, of course, they also take the money that's provided to them through these member state governments, and they dole it out to various industries. So winemakers in France get subsidies from plumbers in South London, right? Working class plumbers in South London are paying subsidies to keep wine farmers on the go in France. And so what you have is, just to round this out to my final point, is you have all these markets, and that's what it's about individual markets within the member states, each getting a little bit of something. But what Trump, I believe, is aiming for with his tariff deal with the EU is access to the protected markets. So the ring-fence markets, he wants to be able to put into those and have U.S. suppliers of products afforded the same protections that other companies within the EU would have. And I don't think that's beyond reach.
Well, I would see. I'll make one point though. The United States does not have a champagne industry, so that point would not work.
Especially according to the EU regulations, right?
Oh, see, another point too. We talked this one on your radio show. A key thing that the administration does not like is a value-added tax. Now, the value-added tax, from my understanding and from my research on it, is a major revenue driver for the bloc nations. I think it accounts for about 20% of the overall aggregate for revenues. That is not something I believe that the European Union is going to suddenly dismantle and say, okay, we're not going to rely on, we're not going to suddenly, not generate revenues from the value added taxes, considering the fiscal strain that a lot of these governments have. So this circles back to my point, how it's all fine. You talk about champagne, you talk about winemakers. There's still trimming around the edges. It's not going to be a transformational trade agreement that the U.S. and the EU are going to lead to. And just on the logistics alone. So the administration claims that 200 countries have reached out to the administration to reach trade agreements. You need an immense amount of manpower to negotiate these trade agreements. And they all keep saying that it's going to happen soon. These announcements are going to happen, shortly. The only announcement we have so far is the United Kingdom, and it's been 2 months when that whole Liberation Day announcement occurred. So you talk about these subsidies, fine, but they're not going to be removed. They're not going to be abolished. They're going to say we're gonna lower the tariff rate by a minuscule percentage on this product, and then Trump's gonna call it a win, and then the market's gonna cheer, and then they're gonna say, okay, fine, this didn't amount to much at all. So now we know what the future trading agreements are gonna look like with India or with China or with Liechtenstein.
Well, Liechtenstein's not in the EU, but there'll have to be a bespoke one. But
or the Penguin Islands, whichever island that they got there.
The Falklands, as I call it, and we'll continue to call it despite Argentina's protests.
I when the Liberation Day announcement happened, I fell for it. I thought, okay, yeah, he's really going to upend global trade. He's really going to impose all these massive tariffs on these countries. He's gonna pummel them into submission. But a week later, when they reversed, and you had Kevin Hassett say, he's a National Economic Council director, and he said, yeah, the bond yields really encouraged us to, make a premature announcement that they were backpedaling. But my whole conclusion out of this is that the administration did not understand, did not expect the market's reaction of, stocks nosediving and the treasury yield soaring.
We're going to continue this conversation after the short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation's economics editor, Andrew Moran. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our conversation about the overall impact of Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. And Andrew, I want to kind of go broad spectrum on this, if we may. So your contention, and I think it's a valid one, is that it's not going to be this total upset of global markets when the dust settles on the tariff negotiations. And I think you're right on that. However, my counter argument would be that it was never actually intended to be. It was intended to be, we'll make a little bit of extra from this country. We'll make a little bit of extra from this country. And you spread that across 190 countries, and you end up with quite a nice pot. Now, so I want to talk about the pot and what that's really coming up for. So I believe March was $16 billion, which is it's a record collection, which isn't a huge amount, is it? 16 billion considering the overall spending. But here's how I want to examine this. The lens that I want to examine this through is what the trajectory is here. So you've got this 16 billion in March, whatever it was in February, and then the 10 days of Trump's presidency in January. And so you project that going forward. We're looking over a year, assuming things stay on a similar trajectory. We're probably talking, 80 to 100 billion a year. Is that fair?
Your estimate is definitely more accurate than the other estimates I've seen in the open marketplace, where the government itself says, oh yeah, we're going to collect $600 billion a year, and we're going to collect $6 trillion over 10 years, which is absolutely insane. But I think your projection is far more accurate.
So there's 100 billion a year there. Now that is not going to pay for the repeal of income tax. And that's what I really want to get to, is Donald Trump's musings on income tax. So there has to be a multi-pronged approach to this, right? A multi-level analysis of how you get to, this is what we can do for income tax in a political sphere. So there's tariffs coming in, let's say 100 billion, maybe a little more. That's obviously not. So I think, was it 2024, there was 6 trillion outlays from the government, 4.1 trillion revenue incoming. And so, that's 2 trillion that's just been borrowed and it has to be paid back. So tariffs by themselves won't do anything. You need a multi-pronged approach to do anything around the edges of income tax. And so you've got DOGE, which is optimistically, by the time it shuts up, the project shuts up shop, although the department won't in July 2026. Optimistically, it will cut, I would say, in my opinion, maybe 800 to 900 billion off yearly expenditures. So you've got that, plus you've got 100 billion off tariffs. That's $1 trillion aside per year, which is interesting, but it does nothing to deal with the extra 2 billion spending on top of the 4 billion revenue. So what other areas can Donald Trump look at, or the government look at, or successive governments look at, to try and get these numbers close together?
Ooh, wow, there's lots to unpack there.
If
well,
there are,
well, the one area which
I've been storing all this up.
the one area that the administration and will say they will not touch is the mandatory side of spending. But since that accounts for, in 10 years, it's going to account for about 70% of all spending. That's an area you're going to have to eventually touch. You talked about Doge. The problem with Doge is that, yeah, it's finding cuts. I think to date, let's just be liberal and say, yeah, $100 billion. The problem is that the Congress is not codifying this. So it's not actually taking its the cuts and, reducing the budget with it. Now, tariff revenue, that's another interesting thing. When we look at all these tariff revenue estimates, it's all based on, okay, assuming that global trade remains the same, nothing changes at all, then it generates, $3 trillion over 10 years. But of course, as we all know, tariffs do upend trade flows. Now also with tariff revenues, Scott Bessent, he compared it to a shrinking ice cube in a glass. He was saying, yeah, fine, tariff revenues, you hope will pay for a lot of government spending, but eventually, once more, you have onshoring and reshoring of manufacturing, then you increase domestic income, and therefore that pays for more government spending. Now, also on income taxes alone, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, he was on, I think it was 60 Minutes, and he was saying, you want to eventually eliminate income taxes for anyone paying less than $150,000. Once again, he later clarified only once you balance the budget. So therefore, you know that you're never leaving the income tax because the budget will never be balanced. So so as you said, there's a multi-pronged analysis you need to engage upon when you talk about the income tax and tariff revenues.
So we know that Donald Trump is in many ways, the P.T. Barnum of the political world. I think that's accepted by everybody, including Donald Trump. And you have this situation. So you have the status quo now where this is income tax. It exists as it does. And then he's saying in this bright, sunny, golden age, there'll be zero income tax on people earning less than $150,000. The reality, I think, is going to be somewhere along a spectrum in the middle there for what can be achieved. Where do you think that will land by the time the next presidential election comes around? Where do you think reality will show its head?
I think the reality is the current one big beautiful bill. I think that's going to be the permanent status quo tax rates. So therefore you're never going to limit income tax. You look at the monthly Treasury statement. You look at the interest payments and you compare it to, let's say, the income tax collections. So, and in many months, the income tax collections account for nearly half of interest payments alone. So how can you eliminate a major source of revenue for the government just to service the debt? It's not going to happen. So the One Big Beautiful Bill, it permanently extends the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So you have across the board lower income tax brackets. So that's the reality of the situation. You're not going to eliminate, you're not going to abolish income tax. No matter how great that would be, you're not eliminating and you're not balancing the budget. So maybe I'm just a skeptic, but those numbers do not support the projections and proposals from many administration officials.
So we have a big, beautiful bill will be the standard.
Yeah.
And so what I guess people who are sick of paying income taxes are looking for a bigger and more beautiful bill next time around. Andrew Moran, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us today Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Mr. Dave Patterson. Thanks for coming in, Dave.
Thank you, Mark. Always happy to be with you.
So, Dave, the big news for me in recent days, and I predict that it will be going forward, is the funding of not the Iron Dome. Trump calls it the Golden Dome, I believe.
Yes, he does.
Which is, I think that's a beautiful name. It's a big, beautiful name for a big, beautiful dome. And so it's something that everybody thinks will protect the United States well. I haven't really heard any adult criticism of actually having an Iron Dome system. However, I have heard criticisms from a couple of things. Number one is the funding And I really want to talk about that, because how is that going to be paid for? But number two, and I think this is pretty interesting, is we're hearing criticism from inside America saying that other nations won't like it that America has an Iron Dome system. And I'm thinking, well, isn't that the whole point, Dave?
Yeah, I mean,
Let's deal with the second one first.
yeah, let's do that, because that is so that is so globalistic and Eurocentric, right? I mean, and that is precisely what the Trump administration is not about.
Yeah.
This is about America first and keeping Americans safe. And so to hear that other nations might not like this means clearly to me that we're doing something right. You know, as to take a page out of Marco Rubio's book, no, when I believe it was Senator Cade said, if I had it to do over again, I would not have voted to confirm you. And he says, well, then I must be doing something right.
Yeah. So the chief worrywarts, as we might call them, apparently are, and again, this kind of proves that you're doing something right with it.
Yeah.
Are China and Russia. And so I've been reading critics saying that China won't be happy that the US has such a such a capability, and Russia won't be happy that the US has such capability. And I think, well, the very fact that they're not happy about it proves to me, on a personal level, that that's exactly the reason that America should have it. Because despite the Biden administration protestations that we are not adversaries, we live in an adversarial world. That's the reality. And he who fails to prepare for future adverse events is risking almost everything that people hold dear.
Well, that's right. I mean, and so for Biden to say we are not adversaries, you know, is pretty much emblematic of the entire 4 years that we endured. They never got it. They never understood the world in which we live. Trump does. He does get it. And, you know, I always I wrote against this notion of, if we're real nice to you, will you be real nice to us, which was the mantra of the Biden administration. And we can see how well how that worked for them. It doesn't. And so Trump is a realist, and he sees that he lives in a world where no matter what we say, China has started to build and will soon be have completed more than 300 ICBM silos. Well, they're not doing that to hold wheat, and the consequence of that is that we have to do something that will at least put them a little bit back on their feet. The criticism that I hear mostly is, oh my goodness, by having a defensive system, we are abrogating our responsibility for deterrence. Well, that's absurd. Think about it. Having a defensive system actually enhances the deterrent effect of the capability that you have.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's natural. So, for example, if you make if you make a potential enemy's stockpile of ICBMs pointless, then they will stop stockpiling ICBMs. It's very much a de-escalation of the destructive capability of modern weaponry, and the idea that we should instead be building a better, bigger bomb. That's everything that everybody should be really against, I think, right? I mean,
well, absolutely. And I think too, not to take the conversation into the metaphysical, but the fact is that deterrence is a kinetic response.
Yes.
I have the capability to beat you. You have the capability to destroy me. We are at a standoff. On the other hand, if your capability not only is there to send missiles their way, should that have to happen, but you can also defend against their missiles, it becomes actually more for them than just pointless.
Yeah.
It becomes losing. You have lost this battle. You have to kind of rethink your position in the world and come back with something better than we're going to defeat you, because you can't.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you cannot do that. So it's
Who was it who said peace through strength? Was that Ronald Reagan?
absolutely,
Yeah.
and it's just so it actually becomes more of a winning solution than it is a defensive solution, which would, deterrence was always defensive. The only thing that we had going for us is the uncertainty on the part of our enemies that if they shot their counterforce missiles, that they'd hit empty silos.
Yes. So, yeah, I really think that people who are criticizing the Iron Dome on that subject, they're absolutely missing the point. But let's get to the criticisms of cost. So it's not a done deal, is it? Because I believe, I might have these figures wrong, but I believe there's $25 billion to get the ball rolling on this, which is not going to be enough to pay for everything involved. And if we may just take a minute to talk about what's involved with that, it's I'm sure all of our listeners know how the Iron Dome system works. Is a series of satellites that first track everything, and then there's some more satellites that would have essentially Star Wars capability that can take down missiles as they're en route. So it's a big mass of satellites that would need to be put up into orbit. Is that about right?
Well, it is ultimately. I think that's their goal. But in the meantime, President Trump saw Iron Dome, and his thinking was, well, we'll just model what we have after Iron Dome. When they announced it, and from the Oval Office, and he announced the program manager, General Goodline, there was a graphic that went up, and it had 4 or 5 different things, but one of them was ground-based missiles and a ground-based system. That's what Iron Dome is. It's a ground-based system. That's what you would have to have initially.
Yeah.
And so you can scale something on the order of Iron Dome and have a ground-based system to begin with, which is what we have currently with our exciting 3 sites and 44 missiles after 24 years of spending money on that. And so this would be and why he's talking about 3 years is, I think that's what's in his mind, that you create this system, and okay, the argument is, well, Israel is the size of Rhode Island, and it would just be an enormous project. But the idea is, okay, fine, divide the country up into those areas that are the size of Israel, and put systems in each of those regions so as to defend against that area. But I think that more to the point, if you think about this whole problem, it is a detect, identify, track, intercept, destroy. Right? That's the point. And so the problem that people are talking about is that now we're looking at hypersonic missiles. Okay, well, Raytheon just came out with a new version of their tracking and intercept radar that handles hypersonic weapons. And so we're in a position of now having the capability, perhaps rudimentary as it is, but certainly consistent with the threat, that you scale. And now you can scale these things to the point where, okay, we have all these different missile systems, that basically we have a high-low mix already. We don't have to develop anything for a ground-based system. And you've got, the terminal high-altitude intercept in THAAD. You've got Patriots and all manner of Israelis, Arrow 2 and 3, And so you have the capability to start to create this system. And I can't put, thoughts in President Trump's mind, but I think that's pretty much how he sees this.
Yeah, so it's really just taking existing technologies, multiplying them on a grand scale, and
Scaling them, right?
start upscaling them with the latest technologies into existing systems. Now, we're going to be continuing our conversation on Donald Trump's aims, plans, and schemes after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we continue our conversation with Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Dave Patterson. Dave, thanks for sticking around. Earlier in the show, we were talking about the Iron Dome or the Golden Dome system, which I love the name. It's such a great name, right? It harkens back to Greek mythology, the Golden Fleece, the Golden Dome.
Golden Age.
Golden Age. Or Golden Age thinking. Now, there's a non-positive one. But there are many other things that the Trump administration is doing with national security. And I think one that in 2016, 2017 was the driving issue. And then it came to a head under the Biden administration when floods of illegal migrants crossed the U.S. border. But now it seems that the legacy media just doesn't talk about the border anymore. And I think the numbers show why, don't they? We had the March figures. It was down 94% illegal border crossings this March from last March. And that's a difference of thousands of people per day. And I wonder why...
Tens of thousands.
I wonder why it's become such a non-issue when it's always seemed to me to be one of the most important national security issues. People you don't know who may want to do you harm, may want to do your country harm on a large scale, are allowed to freely enter and leave the nation. And I always wondered why that was never considered as one of the key national security issues. But now nobody talks about it because and why is that? Is it because it's being dealt with, or is there something else?
I think yes, absolutely, because it's being dealt with. I mean, on one day, some poor schnook, one person tried to get across the border. I mean, that's pretty effective. That's a pretty effective border. Yeah. And as President Trump says, it is the best circumstance that we've had. But it's not because he didn't do anything. It's because he made the border secure. He sealed up the southern border. And so if he doesn't have much to talk about in terms of flooding the country, so the media doesn't have much to talk about either. What they will talk about is, oh my goodness, he's sending another 1,100 troops to the border. Okay, well, that's how you secure the border. And so it's been pretty effective. And so why would you stop doing something that's been effective?
Let's talk about that. So what has he done here? There's the political will side, and I do want to get to that because it seems to me that the driving force behind this was just political. Joe Biden could have done this, but he chose not to.
Absolutely.
But what specifically has Donald Trump, the administration, done since coming into office the second time to shut down that border physically?
Well, first of all, he stopped catch and release. That's the first thing. That was the first day so that's no longer a policy. Secondly, which was kind of, I won't say ingenious, but it was pretty smart. And that is he established a military reservation on the easement that the United States has on the border. So now you cross the border and you are trespassing on a military reservation, and that's against the law.
Sure.
So now you've got now they're anybody who tries that is not only an illegal alien, but has broken the law by trespassing on a military installation. Yeah, that's pretty good.
It's pretty smart. It's pretty smart.
And it didn't take legislation to do that.
Okay, so we've got these in, and now nobody's talking about the border wall, And I believe construction is still taking place.
Absolutely.
Construction and repairs. Do you have any of the latest information on that?
Well, it's continuing, and they put money in the budget for it, and it's I'm not sure, but I do think it may be in the reconciliation bill as well, but it's certainly in the 26 budget.
Okay, so there's money for the wall. The last I heard was from Caroline Levitt. And this is just the last I heard, not necessarily the last that she made mention of it, that there was roughly an extra 80 miles had been built and another 70 or something had been reinforced. Do you think that, because Donald Trump, one way or the other, he finishes his presidency in January.
Yeah, the campaign's in 2028. And
so he's out in 2029. And whoever comes in, whether that's Democrat or Republican or Libertarian, because you never know, right? You never.
Yeah. Maybe not the Green Party, but
you never know.
Never know.
You never know. If you want to know about political upsets, just look across the Atlantic at Nigel Farage, the man they thought would never even become a member of Parliament, is now on track to become the next Prime Minister, which is quite something. And he's getting there over the defeated rubble of arguably the most successful political parties that have ever existed. So never say never in terms of who gets in who wins the 2028 election. But do you think that there'll be backsliding on border control going forward?
So there's sort of a rule in the government that nothing happens except for crisis and late to need. And so if they can't develop a crisis, or a crisis isn't on the border, it'll lose its appeal. On the other hand, they have to, the adults have to get in charge, and they have to keep saying that the reason that we don't have this problem anymore is because of what we did, and we need to maintain that. And you make it a national security priority and a part of your national security strategy. You institutionalize it in terms of the budget, and you're better capable of making sure that initiative remains a viable part of national security. And it is. I mean, it is a part of national security. I once was watching a hearing, and some poor soul on the left said, "Well, I take offense at you calling this an invasion." And I was thinking, well, let me see. 12 million is not an invasion, but 257,000 on D-Day was an invasion. I'm sorry, I don't get that.
257,000, that's rookie numbers.
Yeah.
Rookie numbers. Need to get those figures up there. Dave Patterson, final word for you. Do you think that the Democratic Party will be swinging back towards the mantra of Bill Clinton in terms of border security and illegal immigration come the next election?
Well, I think they would if they were smart, but there's no indicator to me that they'll suddenly become smart. We've seen the move to the left with AOC and Bernie Sanders, and I just don't see it happening in the near term. But they may well, the liberal side, the progressive side, the lunatic side may well wear out their welcome and be discarded in favor of common sense.
Yeah, when one fails to learn the lessons of the past, they're doomed to repeat them, and that could even entail electorally. Dave Patterson, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Andrew Moran and Dave Patterson, and of course extend my thanks to you, the listeners at home, for tuning in each and every week. You are appreciated. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, nor legislation. This presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.